Chαίrete and salvete, omnes. I'm Taigan, the ancient Geeko-Roman, and welcome to another video. Today, I think I'm going to ramble a little bit because I just finished my Roman drama class, which was super fun, but because it was an accelerated class, I felt like I didn't absorb as much as I could have, so it took me a while to get an idea of what I wanted to do with the paper. So because I started with crime and punishment was kind of what I was interested in, because almost all of my papers up until now have all been about religion or the gods, which is totally fine, and that's kind of what I wanted to do anyway. That's where my focus is going to be eventually. But because I kind of wanted to get out of my comfort zone, I was like, let's look into Roman law and see if the crime and punishment that's reflected in the plays that we read by Seneca would be reflective of actual law and punishment for the crimes that were committed, or if these were just extremely dramatized versions of the law, which again would be a really cool paper if there was enough scholarship out there for me to dig into in a short period of time. But unfortunately, because it was an accelerated class, I ended up going in a completely different direction. So what I'm going to talk about now is, well, we read Seneca and we read Medea by Seneca. That was our main focus play. She had us doing them in chunks because if you're translating it from Latin, it takes you a little longer, whereas everything else we read in translation. And then Euripides also wrote Medea. And confession time, I have only read both Medeas in translation. So for my paper, what I ended up doing was I explored the idea of a metic woman, M-E-T-I-C, metic. It's the foreign people who immigrated to Athens. And so I was then focused on, okay, so as a foreign woman, is Medea just kind of already a tragedy because she has prejudices against her no matter what? So my paper kind of explored that. Even though it's in Corinth, we had to kind of use the Athenian law. Obviously, each city-state area was going to have its own set of laws, but because we have so much from Athens, that's kind of what I had to go off of. And then for Rome, I basically did the same thing. And to consider the different types of laws that have to do with foreign people, I had to make sure I was also looking at the laws that were during the time of each author's writing, because writers are writing to reflect the time that they live in. So it's going to be different, not just because Greece and Rome, even though both plays are set in Greece, the Roman play is very Roman. So for that, what I ended up doing was I considered the Athenian law and how metic women are treated with the things that we still have. I actually got a really cool book about immigrant women in Athens by Dr. Rebecca Fudo Kennedy, and so I actually absolutely enjoyed the book. I didn't get to read it all in depth because, again, it was an accelerated class and I was writing this paper in like 4 days because my entire subject changed. So I had to refocus the whole paper in that little amount of time. So I was doing all my research over again. So it took me a little while, and I had to rent the book, so I'm going to actually read her book now that I have time for fun before I start my next semester. So for that, I looked at different aspects of Medea as a foreign woman. And not just as a foreign woman, but as a woman in the ancient world, and what the expectations are as a woman, not just in the sense of I have to pay taxes because I'm foreign, but in the idea of marriage, motherhood, and then as a murderer. So I explored that. The title of my paper ended up being Medea, Wife, Mother, Monster, because in the plays she's referred to as a barbarian or a monster more than once, and not just by other people but by herself. So I went into that a lot about how she was very much made the other because she is foreign. And so the tragedy to me in the beginning of all of this is that Medea is already a monster to everyone because she is foreign. So even if she hadn't done all of those things, she would still face all these prejudices, which is very prominent as a thing for a lot of people still who are foreign in different countries. There's a lot of difficulty with that. So there's a relation between these books and these plays even now with the people who have to deal with that kind of prejudice. So it still is very relevant now. So for the plays, I was really interested in how people would see the marriages of foreign women. And I went through a lot of that, and it's very, very interesting how much you had to do to be considered a legally married person if you were foreign. A lot of times, especially as a Medic woman, you wouldn't end up with a citizen at all. So because foreign women were foreign, there's all these different laws that have to do with it, and it changed a little bit over time and went back and forth because, again, the laws had to change with the needs of the cities at the time. So when there were things like a plague, it was a little more lenient on who gets to marry who. And so for all of that, basically the only thing that was really stopping Medea and Jason from having a legal marriage was the fact that he didn't have the permission, they didn't have the permission of her father. But in the cities that they were in, technically both Jason and Medea are medics. So they are both kind of within the law if you think about it that way. Whereas in Roman law, there's a lot of other factors that come into marriage that I outlined in my paper. And if any of you want to read the paper I ended up writing, it was really rushed and really a lot all at once. So if you want to read my paper, I will send it to you. It's not very good because again, I had to redo all my research in like 4 days and send it in the last day. But I feel like it's a good start, and I would like to expand on it and work harder on it to make it a very good and possibly published paper, depending on whether or not it would add to scholarship. So with the Roman law and marriage, then a lot of things have factors. I'm not going to remember all of them off at the top of my head right now because there is a lot of different factors in what is a legal marriage, but to Romans, basically, Medea and Jason aren't married. And so he was within his right to say that he was no longer married to Medea, because even if it was a bit calloused, he was in with his legal rights. As a Roman watching this play, if you said, okay, his intent is no longer there to be married to Medea, that's a divorce, basically. That's a very, very shortened version of how divorce works in Rome. And so for that, for a Roman watching the play of Medea by Seneca, Jason's kind of a dick, but he's within his legal rights to marry Crisa. So it doesn't seem that weird. So especially in the Seneca version, Medea seems like she is way overreacting because then they're not really married. But because in both of them, I almost said Medusa. No, that's the wrong one. Medea is thinking, I'm still married to Jason, he is the adulterer, and therefore he must be punished. but because she's a foreign woman, she can't really do anything about it. And it's not like she's going to have any support from her family after what happened. And so all of that is very interesting. And then for the motherhood thing, I found it interesting that it's much simpler for us to be sympathetic to Medea in the Euripides version, in my opinion, because she seems to actually care about her children to a point. Because throughout the play, she doesn't want to see her kids because they're Jason's, and she's using them as pawns, but she does that in both plays. She's using her children as pawns to kill their stepmother, to kill Carissa. And so because of that, yes, she's not a good mother, but she does care for her children in her own way. It's just a really messed up way. And for those of us who might have parents who are like that, I mean, obviously if you're watching this, your mother didn't murder you, but you might understand that sometimes parental love is really weird and very bad. So she's using her kids as pawns in the Greek version as well as the Roman version, but in the Greek version, I feel that she is more attached to her children. Even though she's like, I don't want to see them, they're Jason's, eventually she does start interacting with them, and we get to see her interact with them, and because of that, there is a motherly love there, whereas she seems much more distant and removed from her children in the Seneca version. In the Seneca version, she even says that she's denouncing her children, which is apparently a thing you can do in ancient Rome as well, which I didn't get really into that because I couldn't find the specific law that I was looking for, the specific outline of the way that you disown your children in Latin, but there's a Latin part of Seneca where she basically disowns her children and then kills them. And the biggest point that I made that was different between the Greek version and the Roman version for Medea is the fact that she, in the Euripides play, at the end, she denies Jason from getting the bodies back of the children and says, I'm going to bury them at a temple of Hera because then no one can desecrate their bodies, and I am going to do a celebration and give a blood sacrifice to atone for this every year in Corinth. So she has a plan to kind of redeem herself in a way for her crime of killing these children, whereas in the Roman version she's just like, in the translation I read, which was Emily Wilson, I absolutely adored it, but she threw the children apparently like back at him and was like, here daddy, take back your children, I don't want it. So there's a big difference in just tossing your kids' bodies at your ex-husband and saying, they're your problem now, go ahead and mourn them, I don't care. Whereas in the Euripides, no, Jason, you can't have them. I'm going to put them where my enemies can't hurt them anymore. And that was another thing. When she killed the kids, her reasoning in the Euripides version, from the way I interpreted it, was, I am killing them because whatever the Corinthians are going to be doing is going to be so much worse than what I do. And I don't want them to have to suffer more than they need to. Whereas the Seneca version, she kills one kid, and then Jason comes on while the other one is still alive. Euripides had both the kids killed off stage. We're seeing, if this was on stage, the way that it's set up, it sounds like we're seeing both of these kids get murdered. So that's a completely different way to see it, because when you see it, it makes it a lot harder to sympathize with Medea. She kills her first kid, and then Jason comes in and sees her with the second child and is trying to convince her, you know, one is enough, you've had your vengeance, please just let him live. And she's like, no, I'm not gonna let him live, and if I'm pregnant with anybody who is related to you, I'm gonna scrape it out with a sword. So not only is she threatening the children they already have, well, the one that they still have. And she's now saying, if I have any evidence of your genetic pool within my body, I will scrape it out with a weapon to make sure I am not connected to you ever again at all by anything, which is really intense. And it makes her so much more, I don't know, it makes her more of a monster in some ways if you view it that way. It can be understandable if you are trying to see things from the side of Medea. It can be this is like the ultimate vengeance for her. And so with that, I personally think that the Seneca, I like both plays. I don't dismiss either of them as one better than the other. I personally like Euripides better, but that might just be because it's easier for me to relate to and sympathize with Medea in that play. Whereas in Seneca, I actually really do like it because there's a lot of other elements in there. And in the Seneca version, you get a lot of catalogs of like her ingredients and her spells and what she's doing, how she's making her poisons, which you don't get in the Euripides, which I think is very fascinating and interesting. And I've never read it until this summer, so I was really intrigued by that because I had never read any Seneca plays or any Seneca at all, actually. And so it was really cool to see the differences in between. So basically, as a foreign woman, Medea probably would have had an issue regardless. There was another Medic woman who ended up getting sentenced to death with her kids because she sold a potion. It was a medicine, pharmakia. She sold that, and it was resold by someone else, and I guess something happened to the person who took it, so she ended up getting tried, and then not just her, but her kids as well were killed. So it makes you wonder, okay, was Medea doing this because she knew either way she was going to die, and that the Corinthians would probably kill her kids in a more brutal way than she did? So that's basically where I ended up taking the paper. She is committing a crime she knew she was going to be blamed for anyway as a foreigner. And she escaped to another city where she was welcomed because she offered her services as either a midwife or someone who could work her magic to get King Aegeus a child who has been trying to conceive and they can't in Athens. Because when you are a foreign woman, you are good if you are not a wife or mother yet. If you contribute to society in some way, then you're fine for staying there, basically. And so it was really interesting to try to navigate all of that, and I would really like to expand on this paper. So I'd like to hear what your thoughts are about all of this. Do you prefer Euripides? Do you prefer Seneca? Do you think that I definitely should read them both in Greek and Latin before I decide which one I like better? Because again, I've only read them in translation because one, I did an undergrad as a literature and translation class, which still counted for my major, and then Seneca I did in translation. Tell me what y'all think, and let me know. Do you prefer Euripides? Do you prefer Seneca? Why? Why not? Do you think that I'm completely wrong in all of this and that Medea is not a sympathetic character at all and we shouldn't be feeling bad for her because she's murdered her children and her ex-husband's new wife and the king of Corinth? Or is it completely understandable the route she took if she knew that she was going to die anyway for crimes that she didn't even commit yet? Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Sorry I rambled for so long, but I'm gonna go now. And it's breakfast time. So I will see you all next week. Bye!